it was actually quite an unusual process, this one, because we did it in 2 chunks, just due to the nature of this year and scheduling things being changed a bit. So we rehearsed for 2 weeks in July, and that first 2 weeks was really concentrating heavily on the script, pulling apart the script and working with Kieran to find ways to rewrite certain things, to make sure that the script was doing exactly what we wanted it to do, to make sure it was the right length and scenes were the right length. So that sort of first little while was very much about text-based work, talking about the characters, working with the actors to develop their characters, through talking about their kind of their feelings about who these characters were, maybe referencing people that they thought they were like within their own lives, within popular culture, within the sort of wider world of Scotland and the political world in Scotland. So really getting a kind of group understanding of the world and the characters within that world, and the town, the imaginary town of the piece. We talked a lot about that, where that might be, what that might be like, what the industry there would have been. So we created this kind of imagined world of the place, as I say, through conversations, through dialogue with the actors and with Kieran. And then we in the second week of that first period of rehearsals, we just started to sort of vaguely stage it. You know, I'm a great believer in getting something up on its feet quickly is a really exciting, you learn a lot about it. So we got it up, you know, we weren't sort of sitting around talking for a long time. We got up and started working quite quickly. And by the end of that first 2 weeks, we had a rough sketch of what the play was going to look like. We then had a break of 2 months, really, nearly 2 months, while I had to go away and work on another show. And so we came back. When we came back, we kind of hit the ground running because we knew the shape of the piece, we knew who the characters were, the script was kind of set in stone, the actors had begun to learn it. So we just had this 2 weeks to really play with revisiting all the scenes again, looking at them a bit more in depth, and letting the actors play the scenes out because they understood the characters much better now. They understood the relationships really well because they'd kind of had this time away. So the second half was all just on its feet practical work, and also physical work, because we had a movement director on the piece who did all of the kind of transitions in and out of scenes. And there's a big sequence where lots of chairs get moved about the stage, and a sequence where the big splash resort was revealed. So we had to work all of that out with a movement director. So that was the second phase, and obviously then putting all the technology into stuff as well. The Skype calls and the video stuff and the text messages. We had to work out the timings of all of that. So that was in the second half of rehearsals, because obviously that takes a while for the video designer to create that content. So that gets kind of rehearsed as we're rehearsing the acting as well. So I guess it was in 2 chunks, but I guess it was like three stages, I would say. Script work, world building, and then the physical making of the play. I don't necessarily use specific techniques. I tend to kind of employ asking a lot of questions of the actors, really. I think we've all got experiences that we draw on, relationships that we have in our lives that are similar to the relationships that are playing out in the play. With Gabe and Hannah that played Vonnie and Kirsten, I know them both very well, or I've worked with them a lot. So I sort of was able to ask them questions about their own life, not in a way that felt like I was probing them or I was asking them anything that they were uncomfortable with. I just was encouraging them to talk about their lives and how their lives relate to the characters in the play. Now, both Gabe and Hannah both happen to have sisters, so they found it very easy to remember what it's like to have these arguments with a sister. Neither of them, they're not politicians or scientists. Those are harder things to try and imagine yourselves into, I suppose, than just an argument with a sibling. And so we were really interested in the fact that while the play deals with these big these big themes and these big issues, really at heart it's about people and it's about families. And you know, if you're having an argument with your sibling, whether that's a brother or a sister, older or younger, it gets heated, it gets frantic, it gets nasty and messy. And that's why I think it felt believable, because it didn't feel like two characters speaking about themes within a play. It felt like two people scrapping with each other. And I think that that's what I always pushed and encouraged Hannah and Gabe to find. And that's like, we talked about the thing of letting it be ugly and letting it be scrappy and not being kind of too refined and austere and kind of proper. It needs to have that kind of messiness to it, because that's what families have. So hopefully those were the techniques, you know, just encouraging people to go into themselves and to go into what they would be like in that situation. Imagine yourself in that situation. I mean, that's what acting is, really, just imagining yourself in a situation. So I'm not someone who does lots of exercises or employs kind of techniques that I've read in books or whatever. I just tend to go, who is the person in front of me and how do I bring them to the character? A big theme in the play is truth. Who has the power to tell that truth? Themes of power and who holds that power, and themes of people keeping the truth from other people and so deceiving them. So yeah, truth, power, deception, they do seem like big themes in the play. They're also big themes in the world at the moment and in the world all the time, but they certainly felt very current when we were making this work. So how I directed those things to give them impact was about just going, what are the stakes around things like truth and power, and how do we make those stakes feel really felt? I think that the way that you make something impactful is to make an audience feel like this is really important. What is happening on stage right now is really important. Now, this play is literally a case of life or death when Kirsten discovers the poison in the water. So for her, this truth, having this truth and telling this truth is hugely important. So I think what I did, the way that I directed that was just to make sure that everybody was playing the level of the stakes. Because I think if you go, oh, she's got an email that she's not very happy about, never mind, that's not going to have an impact. What has an impact is, this is the most important email she's ever read. This scene that she's about to have with her sister where she has to tell her, this is the most difficult scene she's ever had. This day, you know, because it all takes place over one day, is the hardest day of her life. So if you bring the stakes up of the situation really high, then I think that, because you can't really, I don't think you can really direct themes. You can't direct ideas. What you direct is relationships between people, and you direct the situations that people find themselves in. So if you bring the heat of those situations up to their highest, you'll see how that situation kind of vibrates at its highest setting, I suppose. And sometimes you want to turn that down. Sometimes you want to put a gag in so that it lightens it a bit. But really, it's about, you know, for me, it's about directing what the writer has written. And you know, I was lucky enough to work with a writer like Kieran, who collaborates. So he and I work together in going, how do we make these themes so present in the situation that they will have impact. The play was originally supposed to be done in village halls, town halls around Scotland. Pre-pandemic, that's where it was going to be. So it was going to tour to various town halls. So that was all automatically, and it was sort of site-specific. So it was automatically a one-room kind of setting. Then when it was rescheduled and put into theatres, we decided we wanted to maintain some of that aesthetic, some of the design decisions that we made when it was going to be these town halls. And so that kind of led us to do this one-room set thing. For me, personally, I'm quite interested in like non-literal design in theatre. So if you're in a house, does it have to look like a house? If you're in an office, does it have to look like an office? And there was something about this room that it was neither Kirsten's kitchen and living room, nor was it Vonnie's office, nor was it wasn't any of the spaces, but it was recognisably a kind of civic hall space. So I guess what I hoped was that it would put in the audience's head this idea of a civic space which is being used for things that it wouldn't normally be used for, which is what you find when you go into these village halls, that they were once places where town meetings took place, but now people have weddings in them, or Christmas parties, or whatever. So that the civic and the corporate have kind of become one. And that's very much one of the themes of the play. So we just decided to have this big open space that could read as anything. Therefore, when they're in a cafe, they use the chairs that you might use in a village hall to represent a cafe, or these trestle tables become a kitchen table and an office table and a cafe table. So it kind of is this sort of non-literal design world, but that does say something about the themes in the play, without being a direct reference to any of the spaces that the play takes place in. So the use of technology in the play was something that we always knew was going to be there. When Kieran and I first started looking at adapting An Enemy of the People into a 21st century context, we sort of knew immediately that social media had to play a part, online, all online media had to play a part. The original play, there's a whole act that Ibsen gets out of, will the newspaper print the story? And of course, in 21st century language, that doesn't work, doesn't make sense, because people can publish whatever they like online. So we knew that was something that we wanted to be part of the kind of fabric of the piece, and therefore part of the design language of the piece as well. And for me, I find the use of cameras and filming on stage really exciting anyway, because I think that theatre is one of the things that excites me about theatre is that we can bring together all of these worlds. Sometimes it can be dance, sometimes it can be film, sometimes it can be theatre, it can be like a gig, but it can be all of these things at once, in a way that I don't think all art forms can be. And so I was always excited about using film cameras on stage. There was also something about the fact that the way we were kind of reimagining it was as a sort of like a thriller. It felt at points like a sort of television thriller. Yeah, we had this idea that we wanted it to have this kind of feeling of a TV thriller. And so that kind of led us to use the cameras as well, and that's why there was all this live camera stuff in it. But also just this idea that we're always being filmed. You know, the phone that you have in your pocket has a camera on it. You know, people are always filming each other. People are putting stuff online all the time. So like just this multimedia kind of cacophony, like this overwhelming noise of cameras and tweets and texts. And, you know, that's how we live our lives now. And of course, that's how that becomes another sort of overwhelming element in Kirsten's struggle to kind of get the truth out there, is that everyone has an opinion, everyone's filming her, everyone's got like footage of her or whatever. It's all there and available as a means of kind of destroying her. So it felt like it was always going to be a character in the play, the technology, and I think hopefully a really exciting one for an audience. Because it's this old play, it's like a 150-year-old play, it's had an influence on lots of things since it was first on till now. One of the main ones being Jaws, which we talked a lot about in the lead up to it and is mentioned in the play, is the fact that the first half of Jaws is basically the same story as An Enemy of the People. There's a character who wants to close down the beaches, stop things from happening, and then the mayor who says, no, we have to keep the beaches open for financial, economic reasons. So that's the same dichotomy, the same sort of struggle that's in the middle of The Enemy of the People. And so, of course, like that's a very well-known kind of cultural trope now, so that has an influence, even though, weirdly, there's a kind of, you know, you're kind of closing the feedback loop there, because the thing that influences our thing is actually influenced by the thing that our thing is based on. So it's kind of does us a nice circle. But then also we had a lot of references to kind of Scandinavian television and films, because the original play is from Norway. We had a lot of references visually to kind of crime drama, and the soundscape sort of felt like that as well. There was also a kind of big, from a theatre point of view, like I think the use of multimedia comes from a lot of theatre that I've seen from Holland and Belgium and Germany. They use a lot of like multimedia in their theatre, and so that was definitely a reference point as well. There's a long history of using that kind of camera work in theatre from a lot of these exciting theatre companies in Europe. So that was a reference point as well. And our social reference points, I suppose, were Scotland. You know, whilst it had this, you know, it's this Norwegian play, it had a kind of European feeling to it. It was very Scottish, like it was set in, you know, it was set in very much a west coast of Scotland, post-industrial place where people have, you know, where people have been forsaken a lot of the time by councils and governments and things like that, and are desperate for something new to come in and kind of bring life back to a community. And that feels very real, and I think a lot of people recognize that in the play and recognize that in production. So that was something that we were kind of aware of when making it. Sometimes it was described as a kind of radical reimagining, and sometimes it was described as being very faithful to the original. And I think it was both. You know, the words that are on the page, none of them are necessary. Well, some of them are the same as Ibsen's. There's probably ands and buts and there's in both of them. But Kieran completely rewrote the script. He didn't stick to, you know, line by line to the structure of the original. But he was very faithful to the kind of the plot of the original. It's very good, it's very well plotted storytelling in the original play. So I think that there are very clear parallels because it's the same story. And weirdly, the story doesn't feel irrelevant. You know, a 150-year-old story still feels relevant today, and that's a really exciting thing, maybe slightly scary thing, that the problems that we face are still the same. In saying that, I just worked on a 2,000-year-old Greek play that also has a lot of the same problems that we seem to be having now. So, you know, it's great when you find those parallels, that they just come up again and again. Again, because it's humans, it's about human nature, it's about people, and people tend to do the same things again and again. But I think if people were to go back and look at the original, the differences are perhaps clearer, because we made ours take place over the course of one day. We made the two central characters sisters rather than brothers. We took out a few characters that felt extraneous. But really, like, you know, it's still about somebody who learns the truth, tries to get it out there, at first is considered a hero and then is demonized and destroyed by a public that turn on them. The relationship between the playwright and the director is a very, very important one, and if you're lucky enough to work with a writer, a generous writer like Kieran, you know, it's a collaboration. It's a really exciting collaboration, because we came to this project at exactly the same time. It wasn't like he'd written the play and then he brought it to me to direct, which is sometimes the relationship where basically you're realizing the vision of the playwright. With this, we were working on a vision together. We were working on, if I had an idea that I wanted to try, for example, a scene set in a car park that we were going to film, Kieran would write that into the play so that we could make it work, because it was about serving both of us. It was about, well, serving the story, serving the play, rather than serving like an extreme vision of the writer, an extreme vision of the director. I think the relationship is about coming together to make the best show for the audience, really, is what that relationship needs to be about. What I wanted the audience to take away from The Enemy was to have an enjoyable night at the theatre. Frankly, you know, I think that everybody brings their own things to a show. I don't think that I certainly don't want to kind of go, here is the message of the play. The themes and the message, if you want to call it that, are clear, I think, in this play, and maybe clearer even now, you know, living through the pandemic. when somebody puts economics ahead of public health, or somebody puts like the prestige or a kind of, their own public image ahead of public health, that's a problem, as we've seen in the last 2 years. But I didn't want people to come and take away that fact, because they already know that. What I wanted them to come away from this thinking was, that was an exciting story, well told. Those were exciting relationships that I saw on stage. Those actors were brilliant. Like, that was cool when the set opened and the balloons came down. Really, I want people to like have a good time when they're watching theatre, more than to take away any message.